Welcome to A Conversation with History. I'm Harry Chrysler of the Institute of International Studies. Our guest today is Thomas Goltz, who is a freelance journalist, documentary filmmaker, and writer. His publications include Azerbaijan Diary and most recently Chechnya Diary. Thomas, welcome to Berkeley.
Pleasure to be here.
Where were you born and raised?
Complex. I was born in Japan, but I have no memory of that. I left when I was 6 months old and ended up in North Dakota, where I was raised and lived until age 18, 19.
And looking back, how do you think your parents shaped your thinking about the world?
Marginally. Marginally. I was just a North Dakota kid. And the one connecting link there is, if today I am proud of the number of languages that I speak and use when traveling and writing, the first one was German, because I had this memory that my father spoke German. And so at age 19 or 20, when I was living in New York, I decided to teach myself German. I rapidly discovered that my father did not speak German.
I see. So there you have it. And where were you educated?
Oh, in terms of lower education, or?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, say, high school, and where did you go to college?
I was part of that generation in Fargo, North Dakota, a local Catholic high school. And precisely at that time where the powers that be decided that foreign languages were completely unnecessary in the education of a young man or a young woman. So I went through this entire junior high and high school experience without having studied any languages whatsoever. Only, as I say, when I moved to New York as a young actor, oddly enough, did I discover that I had an aptitude for languages, and then I sort of pursued that over the years. So it began with German, then after that it was Arabic, and from Arabic to Turkish, from Turkish to Azerbaijani, from Azerbaijani to Russian, and then Chechen and marginal Chechen, Georgian, and various other languages.
But it sounds like you're saying that your background prepared you to be provincial, and you really wound up making a real cosmopolitan leap, so to speak.
Yes.
Yeah. So where did you do your undergraduate work?
I was a latecomer to the university. I initially, when I left my folks' home and started wandering from Fargo, I was working in a factory for a while, and then because I'd always had this sort of theatrical urge, I bounced from Fargo to Minneapolis, from Minneapolis to Chicago, where I studied at the Goodman School for 1 year, joined a troupe of players under the late, great Bill Russo.
The Goodman School is where in?
Chicago. Now it's I believe the Chicago University's theater department, but at that time it was an independent entity. Studied there for a year, and then joined this troupe of players to go off with the late, great Bill Russo. Went off to New York City to embark on a career as an actor / playwright, whatever. That's an important thing because I've always written. And my first, if you will, commercial writings were some relatively obscure plays that were produced off Broadway in New York. Only after that, then I went and lived in Germany for a while, was a house painter, and as the Germans say, Anstreicher und Landstreicher, or painter and bum.
I see.
Then I hitchhiked through Africa, was a one-man wandering Shakespeare player in Africa, but that's the time that I encountered Arabic and I guess the Middle East, and so when I came back at age 23, 24, something like this, then I entered into the university system in New York, studied at New York University, picked up a BA after I excelled, picked up an MA then in Middle Eastern Studies.
And what did you major in?
Middle Eastern Studies and German.
And it's intriguing. I just interviewed Studs Terkel, and he is, I guess one would say, a journalist of sorts, or an anthropologist, but he started as an actor, actually. So it's kind of interesting. So I'll ask you the same question that I asked him, which is, acting is very different from being a journalist, because a journalist is really somebody who wants to listen. Whereas an actor, as part of his preparation, has to listen to hear different voices. Do you make any kind of connection like that, or you just decided to give up acting?
I'm only half serious about this, but you might say that I discarded with stage acting to embrace real life theater.
I see. I see. Touche. Yeah, that's very good. Very good. So let's talk about what you became, a journalist. Why did you wind up doing that?
It just seemed to be the natural conclusion of interests in travel, ability and facility with language, as well as the fact that I'd always written, whether it was plays or Oh My Black Soul poetry or whatever. I never studied journalism for an hour at the university. I rather went to the School of Hard Knocks. First job was in Istanbul, writing sort of a dumbed-down version of the AP as an insert for a local Turkish newspaper. After that, I worked for UPI. After that, AP, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a sort of a natural progression of these three major interests: travel, writing, and facility with language.
And what does it take to be what you have become, a journalist, writer? It strikes me that it takes an awful lot of courage.
I'd say it takes a lot of luck.
Luck. And is luck what got you to the places that you went, namely the Caucasus after the fall of the Soviet Union? I mean, not that you hadn't been other places, but in essence, you were the right person in the right place at the right time, if I can say so.
There's a lot of that, and so I'd like to retract that word luck and substitute something like fate. There is that murky thing of being the right person at the right time, having developed various skills that allow you to then be that right person at that right time. I wouldn't like to say that my career is entirely dependent on fate or luck, but there's an element there that is just undeniable. For example, my association with Azerbaijan. After 10 years of working in Turkey, I picked up a grant, a 2-year grant to go study the Turkic-speaking republics of then Soviet Central Asia. It was still the time of the Soviet Union. I spoke no Russian at the time. Today, looking backwards, that if I had been on this committee, I would have rejected me, simply because, I mean, Turkish is not Uzbek, Turkish is not Kazakh, and this guy doesn't have any Russian, and he's never spent any time in Soviet studies. I mean, come on, let's not choose him, let's get somebody else. But I got the grant, and that was the summer of '91, or the spring of '91, Gulf War #1. As a result, on my way to Tashkent, after shipping all of my things there, I went to Turkey, and because of the great Kurdish crisis at the time, suddenly northern Iraq was opened up, and so I was able to go down into northern Iraq and explore various Kurdish issues as I had not been able to do for the decade prior to that, because Iraq was a very closed shop at the time. Well, one result of this was that emerging in June 1991, I tried to get to Tashkent in Soviet Socialist Republic of Uzbekistan via Moscow, and the Aeroflot authorities said, no, Moscow is not on your visa, go back to San Francisco and get a new one. Well, this was virtually an impossibility. So I rolled the dice and jumped on a flight from Istanbul to the capital of the Soviet Socialist Republic of Azerbaijan, i.e. Baku, on the advice of a friend who said, evoke a little bit of pan-Turkic enthusiasm, and if you can talk your way through Soviet customs, my family will be waiting for you on the other side of the barrier. Well, this is what I did. The assumption was that I was going to spend 4 days in Baku and go straight off to Uzbekistan. I ended up spending 2 of the most fascinating weeks of my life identifying all these various things that would be in the Caucasus. Got to Uzbekistan, and 2 weeks later was August 19th, 1991. The abortive putsch against Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet Union was collapsing. I took a look around, I said, Uzbekistan, and this place is asleep. Where would you rather be to watch this historical moment? And I said, Azerbaijan. So once again, without a visa, I doubled back. What I mean to say in capsule there is that I had no business in being in Azerbaijan initially. It was simply a roll of the dice to try to talk my way into the Soviet Union when I didn't have any right to be there. And that's the way it worked out. I would call that fate.
And it sounds like that you have a remarkable capacity to do a quick study of a place, to get a feel for a place, its culture, its languages, and so on. Is that fair? Is that a fair statement?
I don't think, quick is not the word that I would use. That, to understand Azerbaijan, having a Turkic or Turkey base was certainly advantageous. Azerbaijani is not that different from Turkish. I was able to make the lingual transition there. To make the cultural transition, that's something else.
What?
Malleability. Malleability. Maybe this ability to listen that you mentioned earlier, possibly, again, back to theater, to take on a chameleon-like quality, to be able to insert yourself in a legitimate and honest way, in a relatively quick or relatively speedy sort of manner.
And you really, in your book, your new book, which we'll talk about, you really have a sense of the drama at work in a particular setting. Is that a fair statement?
Once again, I hadn't thought about it like that.
Yeah.
Is this sort of elements of dramaturgy 101 creeping into journalistic writing?
Yeah.
Maybe so.
Yeah, yeah. Help us understand, before we get into your new book, what the Soviet Union's collapse meant for this region that your works cover. First Azerbaijan, then now Chechnya. What were the implications of Soviet rule for that part of the world? And then what happened when it all fell apart, in a general sort of way?
Well, the result was chaos and war, usually described as ethnic national conflict, but one could also describe it as war for various resources. The Soviet state was a centralized state where it theoretically owned everything, and the citizen owned virtually nothing. So citizens had become used to stealing from the state throughout the entire Soviet period, especially toward the end. With the collapse of that structure, the thieving and stealing just carried on, despite the attempts of various leaders to reconstruct mini-states in the shadow of what had been the Soviet Union. It was a fascinating time, and remains a fascinating time to take a look at, of social development, construction, nation building, national collapse. All these things continue on. Some states are doing better than others, but all are a little bit fuzzy right now. There's just been this spate of elections, for example, in the Caucasus, in Azerbaijan, in Georgia, in Armenia, and also allegedly in Chechnya. And every last one of these things are deeply flawed democratic experiments, as if many of the people in the region, quite frankly, don't care.
And at the heart of all of this seems to be the resorting of different peoples in their relationship to each other and in their relationship to the former Soviet Union, now Russia.
At the time of its collapse, the Soviet Union consisted of 126 officially recognized ethnic entities, nations, living in 55 officially recognized territorial units, ranging from the 15 titular republics, Russia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Estonia, etc., down to a series of autonomous republics and even autonomous districts. One of the things that happened at the time of the collapse is you removed the top of the pinnacle, and everybody attempted to move up one level. Azerbaijan attempted and succeeded at becoming an internationally recognized state. IMF, World Bank, UN membership, all the various clubs. The problem came with the autonomous regions that were smaller than the 15 titular republics. One of those, of course, is Mountainous Karabakh, the war that was fought, or the territory that was disputed between Azerbaijan and Armenia. It goes on today, frozen conflict. Another was the Autonomous Republic of Abkhazia in Edward Shevardnadze's Georgia, and another nasty, nasty war that I ended up covering as well. And then in the Russian Federation was the Autonomous Republic of Chechnya Ingushetia, which then became, of course, the Chechen conflict. There are those who argue that had it not been for a personality conflict between Boris Yeltsin and the first leader of the Chechen Republic, Johar Dudayev, that there would have been no war, that there were deals to be made about resources and things like this. So it was a hellishly complex period, and it remains hellishly complex today, which is, I guess, paradoxically, a journalistic delight.
Now, go back a little to our discussion of journalism, because you wound up asserting yourself in Chechnya as a journalist to do a brief documentary of the events there. And I get the sense from your book that you came to have an ambivalence about the news and its relationship to these events, that you seem to worry a lot in the book that you were being forced by the role you were in to move from providing information to providing entertainment, I think you say. Talk a little about that. And this is, we're really now talking about the documentary you made and the news you were providing, as opposed to the book that you've written.
I sallied forth, perhaps with a overly romantic view of Chechnya and the Chechens, are people for whom I have the greatest respect, and I still stand by in their hour of need. However, to suggest that I was not romantically engaged would be incorrect. I was off to find and illustrate the Chechen spirit, how this little people could rally their resources to fend off this overwhelming force called the might of the Russian army, bearing down on them. I also sallied forth with the pretense of changing the world. This is common to many journalists, young and old, that article that you write, that television program that you do will be so effective that the viewer, the reader, will stand up and shout, "Stop! Stop this war! Stop this madness!" And maybe this is a pretense that you have to have at a certain point as a journalist, because otherwise it'll be almost impossible to do your job in these extremely difficult situations. But not just myself, but a whole string of people have run up against the brick wall of impossibility, of the futility of doing this, actually, of changing the world with that one article or that series of articles or that television program. And that's where, I guess, a certain cynicism begins to kick in, and that you start to wonder if you were only being an entertainer and that violence is your tool to entertain.
I get the sense that when you're on the ground, you're covering something, and there is a kind of a really important story you feel to tell about this particular battle or this particular village, that when you then try to take your product, your story or your film, back to the big boys in either Moscow or New York or London, that they have no sense, that everything is out of sync. So what is really important at a particular moment is not something that they're interested in at a particular moment, and therefore there's never a connection between the reality on the ground and the news that's being reported.
You're absolutely right, but the question is what to do about that. This is why God created editors. You know, not everything a journalist on the ground records of a given day or a given week or a given month is going to be, it may be intrinsically interesting to him or her, but it's not going to be intrinsically interesting to the viewing public back home. I once had a mentor in the media many, many years ago who referred to this, oddly enough, as sort of the basketball hoop syndrome. To make a swisher, you have to have the right size story, the right story for the right hoop. It doesn't make any difference how well you throw or toss the ball. If you're throwing a medicine ball at a basketball hoop, it will never go through, and you're just wasting your time. Or if you're throwing a tennis ball up into the basketball hoop, it may go swishing through, but nobody will notice because it is not the right ball for that right hoop. So there's that reality of working in the media as well. If you're out in the field and you are assigned to do a, let's say, a 10-minute video, you better do a 10-minute video. If you come back with an hour's video, you're going to be trying to push a medicine ball through a basketball hoop.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little about Chechnya and the people there. You've said two things to us. One, you had a very romantic view when you went there, and then also that the conflict between Russia and the Chechnyans may at one level have been a personality conflict between two leaders. Help us understand what you found when you got to know the Chechnyan people. And at this point, I should show your book, which is called Chechnya Diary, a war correspondent's story of surviving the war in Chechnya. So talk a little about the evolution of your views toward the people and sort of...
Okay, I'd also like to come back to the subtitle, which I really, really dislike.
Okay, that's fair enough. Good. Would you like to explain why right at this moment, or we can do that? I'll remember to do that later. Let's talk about the Chechnya.
I entered Chechnya in disguise, beard, papach, things like this, illegally from Azerbaijan, thinking that I was going on to go to the capital city, Grozny. This was late January, early February 1995, right after the war had initially begun in December of '94. My mission was to find some individual who embodied this concept of the Chechen spirit. The problem with pursuing this is that anybody who would be willing to work with me, by definition, did not embody the Chechen spirit. Who would have, if you were a fighter or whatever, how could you possibly burden yourself with me with my cameras? I was a one-man camera band at the time, as always. So that was that initial problem. Coupled with that was my mode of entry, which was illegal. And even though I was on the Chechen side of the lines, that the Chechens, by definition, were very, very concerned about who was lurking around taking pictures. So I was arrested often, even by old ladies in markets and things like this. I would say, you know, why are you here in our market? Are you trying to take pictures of us just to make life look normal? It is not normal. Hie thee to the capital city where the battle rages. And so my guide at the time said, look, this is getting to be too problematic. We need a place for you to chill out for a little while where you can get your feet on the ground, we can figure out what exactly you're trying to do here with this program thing you keep on talking about the Chechen spirit. My brother lives in a small little community not far from here. We have a house there. Let's go. So I ended up in this little town called Samashki. In the Chechen language, it means the place of deer. And for the first 3 days that I was more or less incarcerated in this house, I was furious. I was sure I was in the wrong place. I was not with my colleagues under fire in the capital city. I was in the wrong place. I even thought maybe I'd been kidnapped. And then something happened, and I can't exactly put my finger on it, but on day number 3 or day number 4, suddenly I said, you are in Grover's Corners, a la Chechnya, being the reference to the Thornton Wilder play, Our Town. There is no wrong place to be. This muddy little place of 10,000 souls, mainly potato farmers, electricians, blacksmith, teachers. Nobody was filled with any sort of Islamic fundamental urge, if you will, or rabid nationalism. It was just a totally normal, little, boring town trying to stay out of the war that was being, day by day, brought closer and closer into the war. Initially, the interest in the Russians in taking control of this Samashki was vodka. Number of tanks and APCs decided that they were thirsty one evening, and they came in and started pointing their barrels at the doors of the town and demanding vodka.
So these were Russian troops who were fighting battles everywhere.
Yeah, on the outskirts of the town. That's how things began in Samashki. So it was still a relatively normal place when I was there, and that's why I said, you will go to ground here. The writing is on the wall. The Russians will come in and take this place eventually. They must. It controls this railway tracks, etc. But for the time being, you stay here and do a program about our town. Grover's Corners a la Chechnya. That's how this thing began.
And what did you begin to see that you didn't know about these people? They were like, clearly in the book, that they were a product of their history in the Soviet Union, was one story that you tell. Absolutely.
I had actually first been introduced to Chechnya almost by accident. On February 23rd, 1994, a year before the war had begun. And my reason for going there was quite different, rather involved, so we don't have to go there. It has to do with Georgia. But what I ran into was the 50th anniversary of what the Chechens commemorate as their day of genocide. The day of February 23, 24, in 1944, where Joseph Stalin sent Lavrentiy Beria, the head of the NKVD, the predecessor of the KGB, to round up all the suspected peoples of the region, including Chechens, and bundle them off to the wastelands of Central Asia, dissolve their republics within the Russian Federation, and basically make them into non-people. Half died en route on the way to Soviet Central Asia. Solzhenitsyn writes of the Chechens in the Gulag system as being the only people who could not be broken. Stalin dies 1953. Khrushchev rises to power. 1957, he, as part of the de-Stalinization program, rehabilitates the Chechens and others. So in 1957-58, of the survivors in Central Asia, call them 500,000 people or so, the return to the Caucasus begins.
So the diaspora returns.
In large part, yes. This is an extraordinary event in Soviet history because we in the West, or certainly the United States, are taught to think of this monolithic police state where a bird will not fly without the KGB knowing. But here you have this event of 300,000 people in a 2-year period packing their bags, previously non-people. They don't have internal passports. They don't have money. They don't have anything. 300,000 people packing their bags and going 3,000 kilometers back from Central Asia to the Caucasus, to their homelands and to their farms, now occupied by others who have been brought in, settlers. And there's not a trace of this in Soviet history, aside from one little police report about a riot that happens in Grozny. This is as if the Seminole Indians, kicked out of Florida to Oklahoma, would one day decide packing their bags and going back down the Trail of Tears to Florida, and nobody notices. This is phenomenal.
And it's a product just of the liberalization going on at the center in the Soviet Union, and then the people deciding to make this move?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's quite something, yeah.
So the Chechen Ingush Republic is reformulated as slightly smaller than before, and that's when the Chechens become territorial animals, and that's basically when you could say that the process of collapse and the independence movement really begins.
And that would be what year now that you...
1957, 1958.
Yeah.
Just to get back to Samashki, the people...
The village.
Yes. What were they doing there? Many were returnees from Kazakhstan and elsewhere, including a local commander who was one of the guys who arrested me one night as I was walking around the streets of Samashki. And I realized with a jolt that this was the guy who could embody this thing called the Chechen spirit. But the problem there was how to convince him to allow me to tag along with him. Because, as I suggested before, anybody who would say yes to this proposal, by definition, did not embody the Chechen spirit. Anyway, that there was a rocket attack or artillery attack that night, and I ended up in the basement with the women and children and the pickles and, and such like. And then the next day, there was another minor attack going on, and I ended up in the presence of the commander, and I basically said, "Let me stick with you." And he said, "Sure." And thus began this extraordinary relationship with the commander of the garrison town.
And his name was Hussein?
Hussein, yeah. And the book is dedicated to him and his family.
Right, and he taught you a lot just by showing you things in a way about how this history that you've just described was embedded in his consciousness, even on the very land and farm that he had come to occupy. Tell us a little about that.
During one of the first times that we made an excursion together, he brought me to a piece of property that he said he had come back to claim. He himself was a bundle of contradictions. He was a Chechen. He was a Soviet Chechen. So he had been the director of a collective farm out in Kazakhstan, mainly in a Russian-Ukrainian area of Kazakhstan, but here he is. So he had, could call him an agro-scientist or the equivalent of that. He had come back to develop this piece of property that he had remembered from his youth before the exile, and come back and was delighted to find out that nobody else had claimed it or wanted to develop it. Well, the reason for that was that there was a hydroelectric plant, or a miniature hydroelectric plant with sluice gate and things like this, and a small generator and pond, made out of the tombstones of the Chechens who had been living in Samashki prior to February 23rd, 1944. The Soviet authorities under Stalin had come and basically ripped up every last tombstone to use as building blocks. And Hussein said, "Do you understand why I could not settle here? Do you understand why we are now fighting?" And I started to get it at that time. History is deep, deep.
But ultimately, in this particular visit, because the book is the story of several visits, you took up your camera and began filming the response to the Soviets the Russians who are now coming in and shooting up the place, initially, as you suggested earlier, to supply their vodka needs. But then the logic of what was going on, created a kind of battle inertia that you now were in a position to cover.
Yes.
And we should explain to the audience, you're your own cameraman, right? So you have you don't have a producer with you, you don't have a crew with you, you have your back and a backpack, right, with the camera.
I was a one-man band, and that was the way it was designed. I would like to, just for memory's sake, suggest that this was maybe one of the last pre-cell phone, pre-satellite, pre-internet, pre-email, pre-laptop adventures that I've ever been off on. This is 1995, which is basically that fulcrum year. Were I to sally forth today, I would be a fool not to go off with a satellite phone or a cell phone or a laptop, and as a result I would probably remain in constant communication with my editors. This was not the case, this was not possible in 1995. I took a plunge in, and I basically was lost for the next month, which allowed me to achieve a level of intimacy as well with the subject that I would submit to you would be very, very difficult today. So every time that the cell phone rings, "Excuse me, Hussein, but I've got to go off here to talk with my editor." What? But as you suggested, that there was a slow but sure escalation that began first with the vodka run, and then the response to that, and then the response to the response to the response to the response, until finally Samashki was surrounded, and we were under constant sniping attack. Had I crossed a line, I never carried a gun, I never carried a bandolier, but at the same time I was certainly integrated, to use the phrase from the most recent...
Embedded, yes.
Embedded with a bunch of guerrillas on the wrong side of the lines, as it were, going off to ambush positions, and becoming involved in some very, very frightening moments, at least for myself, where I started to wonder what the hell I was doing there at all. What was the point of this, aside from just to collect bang bang to entertain Harry Chrysler back in the United States once he turns on his TV? And at a certain point, it became very clear that the hammer was going to come down, and by that time I had become Tomps, this is where they mispronounced my name there, one of theirs in this little community, and Hussein decided that it was time to get me out. with the tapes before I was captured, killed, the tapes seized, or whatever. And the joint project, at this point it had become the joint project of defining the Chechen spirit through the lens of little Samashki, would be lost.
And we should explain that the Chechens saw you as somebody who could tell their story to the world, which was, from their point of view, very important.
That was the unspoken contract. We will let you achieve a level of intimacy with us here in the hopes that what you do will make a difference for the, not only us here in Samashki, but the larger Chechen story. Whether that was naive of them or not, whether that was naive of me to assume that I could, that's another issue entirely. So the decision was made that I had to get out with the tapes. The question was how. That was the day that the so-called first storming of the town occurred. Much helicopter gunship, rocket attacks, armored train trying to punch its way through town. It wasn't very, very pretty. And then at a certain moment within this, suddenly the guns fell silent. And one of these extraordinary and totally surreal moments in the Chechen War occurred, that down the road, having breached the lines and silenced the guns, came marching 300 Russian mothers against the war, looking for their soldier sons, backed up, as it were, by some 20 or 30 Russian converts to Buddhism, walking down the road in their yellow robes, shaven heads with their symbols, etc., as well as several handfuls of, like there was several Canadian Quakers, as well as other anti-war people from Moscow had come down for this extraordinary march. And in the middle of this march, or covering this thing, was a colleague of mine from the German media, Sonja Mikic, who saw me and then describes me in her book of, coming roaring out of a field, stinking of garlic and bloodshot eyes, and about ready to chew off the head of her cameraman. This was not far from the truth. But she grabbed me by the back of the neck, threw me in her car, and said, "You are coming out with us." So I left with the mothers and the Buddhists and got outside of Samashki, and then we were surrounded by the Russian forces that evening. Once again, it wasn't pretty, and what was particularly nasty about it was that we became associated with a line of howitzers who then started to punch high incendiary stuff into Samashki. So I was now on the far side of the lines and able to watch and record on camera the Russian forces basically assault the people who had been taking care of me for the last 6 weeks.
And what were your feelings as you watched that? I mean, because at one level there's empathy. I mean, you've come to identify with these people. On the other hand, you're a professional who has to get the job done and get the material out to the news media. I mean, how did you deal with all of these conflicts, or is the situation so overwhelming that you really don't have to make choices? You're sort of pushed in one direction.
As a professional, you understand your duty. This was also understood even by my hosts in Samashki, that at some point I was going to have to get out and deal with the world outside of Samashki. As a professional in that situation, it means that you turn your camera back on, no matter how painful it is for you, no matter how stomach-wrenching it is for you, because you've got the bang-bang and it makes for, this is so sad, a better story. Well, this is ultimately what happened, that I then had my story of both sides of the lines, and I went up to Moscow, got out, put together the story that eventually showed on PBS in 1996.
And for which you won an award, which you have right here. You might show the camera actually this award, but it's a award for named after, I guess, a prominent journalism, the Peck Award, right? The
Rory Peck Award.
Yeah.
I didn't win it. This is actually a constellation prize. That I was one of 4 finalists as a result of this material this show that I put together for PBS. I was very glad that I did not win the award, because this was 1997, and the only previous winners of the Rory Peck Award were all dead. This was the first year of the award that the actual finalists were all still alive, because by definition, to win a Rory Peck, you have to go off and do something so insane that basically a condition for the award is that it's life-threatening. Rory himself was a fantastic guy and an old friend of mine who was killed in front of Ostankino, the main Russian television tower, on October 3rd, 1993, when Boris Yeltsin decided to reestablish democracy by turning the tanks and artillery on Parliament and the television station. This is where things started getting very, very curious. At the awards ceremony in London, at the reception following the thing, the main speaker of the BBC came up to me and said, "We at the BBC thought you should have won the Rory Peck Award this year for your work on your little town of Samashki." And I said, "Oh, thank you, thank you." He said, "No, I'm not offering you just cheap consolation. I'm offering you a job. I want you to go back to your little town that you've so romanticized. I want you to find that commander, your friend Hussein, to find out if he's still alive or if he's dead. What happened there? And, more importantly, what was the impact of your presence there? I want you to do an aftermath." I said, "Well, I'll take the job."
So the book, and we're not going to give away the end. We're going to make people buy the book because it's I must say it's a fascinating read. But I do want to talk about the philosophical issue which you came to understand. You quote from the famous physicist Heisenberg, who in essence says, "The observer affects the observed." And this, in a way, is your Shakespearean quote at the beginning of the work, because in this second trip, where you do find Hussein, you talk to him, and you unravel his story, you discover something about yourself as a journalist. And the book, in a way, is your story also. What is it you discovered that you had an impact in a way that you hadn't intended?
Without giving away the end of the book.
Yeah.
That's difficult.
Yeah. If you want to give away, that's fine with me. Yeah.
The essence, maybe this is, well, we could go back to the subtitle just about now on this note, but the essence is that the journalist is not a perfectly neutral vessel. We pretend this, but there's no way you can remain a perfectly neutral vessel, especially in a crisis zone. When somebody is feeding and protecting you and housing you, by definition this will engender loyalties and a certain spin or twist. So that you might say this is terribly obvious, but nonetheless, in the media today, there still seems to be this pretense that we are completely neutral vessels, even to the point of the embedded correspondence in what passed for war in Iraq in March and April of this year. I was, quite frankly, nauseated just watching these so-called neutral vessels give neutral news as they were sharing flak jacket and gas mask with the American military as it lurched forward or ran forward across the deserts of Iraq. This is not neutral. I'm not sure I'm not going to put a value judgment on whether it's good or bad, but it's certainly not neutral. And let's at least admit that. Back to the title, or rather the subtitle of the book, why I disagree with this and why I think it's appropriate to talk about this right now is that it's a war correspondent's story of surviving the war in Chechnya. The title of the book is Chechnya Diary. By definition, it's my story if my name's on the thing. We don't need to repeat that. But I think it kind of misses the entire thing and shifts the emphasis to the vessel or to the recorder, namely the journalist, the war correspondent, as opposed to the event. I wanted and I fought for having the word samashki in that title. I wanted and fought for having the word aftermath in that title. I wanted and sought for having the word massacre in this title, like samashki, the story of a massacre and its aftermath, but to move the emphasis away from the journalist. But the marketing people had their way. I was 700 days late in bringing the manuscript to them, and I didn't have any chips left on the table.
Mm-hmm. You know, as I listened to you, and I knew a little about you because we had been on a trip together in Germany with a group of academics and politicians and so on. And one of the things that I didn't know was this theatrical background, which we've actually touched upon. And it strikes me that in addition to your knowledge of languages, your being in the right place, that in a way that is very important, because it sensitized you to the drama of war, the theater of reality, as you just said, on the one hand, and to see also, to intuit the different characters at play in this drama that was unfolding before you. Do you have any comments on that? I mean, it seems that actually, as I listen to you and read the book, that this theatrical background, in a positive way, I'm not being cynical here, is an important contributor to your ability to tell the story and put it in a philosophical and intellectual context that transcends the story of this individual village.
I hope what you say is accurate.
Comment on it.
Of course, you bring to the table everything that you are and everything that you have been. If you are a nuclear physicist who decides to go and write about war, presumably what you will find most interesting are the things that have to do with nuclear physics. If you have a theatrical background, as it were, this is going to somehow play some role in the writing or the approach. I haven't thought of it in those terms, but when you express it like that, I find it undeniable. Was I constructing a play? No. Was I constructing a novel? No. Was I constructing a script? No. But if I've managed to infuse this story with an element of drama because of everything that I am and have been, how happy am I?
Mm-hmm. Now, but does that background allow you to take the story to a higher level? Because you do that. Because in the end, the book becomes a search for the commandant, the telling of his story, and the telling of the story of how you're covering the story changed the story. And that's a higher level than you get from a historical account of Chechnya, a village lost or something, which this could have been only the story of.
It is what it is, with all the twists and turns. Maybe when I embarked upon this particular project, I didn't even know that I was writing a book. Often one understands this at a certain point. I'm writing a book. I was there as a videographer, pure and simple. It was only when the story began to become something more than just the story of the nature of Chechen resistance and the Chechen spirit, and that the paradoxes and contradictions became manifest, that I realized that I was riding a tiger or something that was taking me to places that I had no intention of going, or when I had embarked upon the thing. In fact, I didn't even know I was going to be writing this book until after the Second War began. And then obscurely, there was a telephone message left on my folks' answering machine in Montana, which was a codex that I didn't recognize, but I called up, and then somebody was speaking Russian on the other end of the telephone, and I said, "This is Thomas Goltz, with whom am I speaking?" And suddenly a voice says, "I'll get him," in Russian. It was the brother of the commander, Hussein. Mm-hmm. This would be year 2001. And from the other side of the moon, this voice began to speak to me, and That's when I realized that I had to tell his story, which is also my story, our story, which is the story of Chechnya, and in quite a different manner than others have told it before.
Mm-hmm. So what did you learn from this odyssey, which you record in your Chechnya Diary?
I am still learning from it. The value of friendship, I mean the profound value, the value of loyalty. I find it, the story is still not completely at an end. I have to go back to Kazakhstan and find Hussein again to deliver this book to him, to have it translated for him, I don't know, so that he can respond and say that this is a thing of great beauty, or this is a thing of nothing but your fantasies and lies, that there's, the story is not over yet for me like that. But I think it's once again this a profound sense of responsibility from to one's subject, that there's no wham bam thank you ma'am that is acceptable in journalism today, or maybe even in life today. You have to take responsibility for your actions, and if that sounds like a new concept, well, I'd be very surprised that. I think that is the overriding lesson of just that you, O journalist, must take responsibility for having been there.
If students were watching this program, I'm sure a lot of them think about going to these places, covering them as journalists, winning awards. What advice would you give them about how to prepare for that kind of future, especially if they read your book and say, I want to do that?
I would start with language right out of the gate, and then I would history, of course, and read and write and write and write and write and live and live and live, but without direct, intimate association with one's subject matter, that I don't see what the point is. The idea of traveling around with translators, I don't see what the point is. To travel around with the so-called hack pack, I don't see what the point is. Maybe I'm just a throwback at this point, but this pre-email, pre-cell phone, pre-satellite phone, pre-video phone thing that they're now doing from Afghanistan and elsewhere seems to me the golden but now gone age of journalism, especially electronic journalism. Print has still got a couple of little things happening for it.
Now, what are the one final point, which is, I think that in your story, which is something that we shouldn't mention, that is the story of this book and the story of the village, is the extent to which, when you do this, you really come to see the world differently. The relationship, for example, of fundamentalist Islam to what was going on in that village is very different than the perception we might have that it's all being driven by fundamentalism. What you're telling us is that by going this route that you went, you come to see that the complexity of the situation, and that it does vary over time.
Yes. At this point, the Chechens have left themselves open, I would have to say, to the charge of Al-Qaeda-like associations, because they did allow that element to creep into Chechnya at war between '94 and today. There's just no denying this. Is that the overwhelming majority of Chechens? Absolutely not. Is that the story that most in the media want to seize on right now? Absolutely. One of the most bizarre elements that happened, which is, I relate this in the book as well, is that when the war began again in 1999 under Vladimir Putin, Yeltsin's now out, or actually he was still there but on his way out, I attempted to go back to Samashki to spend my birthday, actually, which is October 11th. On October 10th, I was up at this most remote Georgian pass into Chechnya, where there was some Georgian guards around, and there was basically a goat path that you could negotiate a truck down. And a friend of mine who was the regional boss of the anti-mining Halo Trust organization. They're active everywhere, Cambodia, Afghanistan, Bosnia, you name it. They also had their operation happening in Chechnya. This guy, the name of my friend was Tom Dibb, former British Marine, probably a sapper, etc. Anyway, we had made arrangements that he would pick me up at the frontier to bring me to Chechnya at war, and then I would go and spend my birthday in Samashki. You might call that romantic and ridiculous, but that's just the way it happened. So on the evening of October 10th, 2 white Mitsubishi Land Cruisers pull up out in this hopelessly remote area, but the Georgians stop them. And Tom says, it's because they think you are media. Just go and spend the night someplace. There's a little shack over here, and meet us here at first light, and we will then cross. Well, I got back there at dawn, but the vehicles were already gone. The Georgian guards said they'd gone back to Tbilisi, but I saw trails going down to the riverbed, and then I thought I saw them emerging on the other side. Gone into Chechnya at war. And out of history. Well, not quite. 2 years later, after September 11th, on December 9th, 2001, there was a front page story in the New York Times, which I could just sum up as this, that they had found evidence of Al-Qaeda and foreign fighters by interviewing some guy who 2 years before, on a drizzly October day, sounds like October 10th, 1999 to me, had been picked up hitchhiking by 2 white Mitsubishi Land Cruisers filled with foreigners, including 2 Brits who had gone to join a fundamentalist Muslim group associated with Al-Qaeda in Chechnya. What? This is Tom Dibb and his friend working for the Halo Trust. But there it is on the front page of the New York Times. And so it's become that first little building block of somebody's article, which will become somebody else's book, which will become the historical record. There you go. The Chechens sadly have left themselves open to this, and they suffer from it to this day.
Tom, on that note, thank you very much for joining us today and sharing with us the story of your odyssey to Chechnya, and we'll hope everybody will go out and buy your book. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you very much for joining us for this conversation with history.